Hello, welcome everyone. This session is titled Combining the Power of ONESOURCE DataFlow and Alteryx to Collect and Manage Tax Data. Today, we're excited to show you a solution we put together for Assa Abloy to solve a pain point around their 5472 compliance process by using both ONESOURCE DataFlow and Alteryx to create a very powerful and efficient solution. My name is Chuck Kamen. I'm a senior manager in KPMG's tax ignition practice. I specialize in ONESOURCE DataFlow implementations. Prior to KPMG, I was at Thomson Reuters for about 3 years. And prior to that, I was in corporate tax for about years, combination of private and public. And I'm happy to be here with you today. I'll hand it over to Mark. Mark Livingston is also with me.
Thank you, Chuck. My name is Mark Livingston. I'm a managing director in our tax transformation and technology practice. So my specialty is really Lean Six Sigma reviews, modeling and analytics, tax provision software implementations. My background's mainly tax, about 25 years of experience in tax before moving over into the process improvement area, and kind of a mix of both public and private accounting as well. With that, Frank.
Hi, Frank Poskis. I'm the tax director here at Assa Abloy. I also have a kind of a mixed background of public and private. I've been at Assa Abloy now for about 6 years, and I'm primarily responsible for the U.S. and foreign compliance, transfer pricing, M&A, and treasury functions here for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. With that, I'll turn it over to Joe Gorski, who's our tax manager.
Hi, I'm Joe Gorski. I'm the manager of tax compliance and accounting at Assa Abloy. I've been here a little over 10 years. I specialize in U.S. income tax compliance, provision, foreign reporting, indirect taxes, and state business license management. I as well had a mixture of working at different public firms, actually at different sizes before I came here. And I pretty much oversee our team of seniors and staff currently.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. Okay, before we get started, I'm required to provide some information on the logistics and CPE for this course. This session has been pre-recorded. However, a subject matter expert is participating in this section live to answer your questions using the Q&A panel. So as you have questions throughout today's session, feel free to ask them. To verify your attendance and qualify you for CPE credit, please ensure you acknowledge all attendance pop-up alerts. Be sure to complete the session survey after attending this session to provide us with valuable feedback. CPE credits for attending the session live will be added to your Synergy CPE certificate that will be emailed to you following the conference. Please direct any CPE questions to the virtual Synergy information desk. And if you're watching this recording post-Synergy, this session will not qualify for CPE credit. Okay. Well, with that said, let's get started. The objectives of the session are upon completion of the session, attendees will be able to recognize how a tax department can apply DataFlow and Alteryx to create a more efficient data collection management process, and know the unique benefits of both solutions in an overall tax process solution. Our agenda for this session is to provide an overview of the project that Mark and I were involved in to review Assa Abloy's existing DataFlow solution and find additional efficiencies in their tax compliance process. We'll summarize the challenges they were dealing with and the solutions Mark and I implemented to solve these challenges by enhancing their existing DataFlow templates and introduced Alteryx into the process. First, though, we'd like to give a brief overview of both ONESOURCE DataFlow and Alteryx to provide some context for those who may not be familiar with these products. Before we do that, though, we wanted to just so the way this is going to work is you will have polling questions pop up to ensure that you're attending the session, but we're also going to ask you some questions that you can answer in your chat, in your text box or your chat box. And so the first one of those is going to be, is data collection and or data management currently a challenge in your department? And we'll be curious to see those. You can, like I said, you can enter the answer to those in the chat box. While you're doing that, we will go ahead and continue with the presentation. Okay, so the overview. Like I said, just wanted to give a brief kind of high-level overview of DataFlow and what DataFlow is and what it does. So DataFlow is an Excel-based data collection tool. For those tax departments that are currently utilizing Excel-based data collection workbooks or tax packages, DataFlow is a really great alternative to this to eliminate many of the inefficiencies you find in the traditional tax package method of collecting data. Again, DataFlow is Excel-based, but unlike traditional Excel-based tax packages, it offers a centralized, standardized, and cloud-based solution that makes it easy to assign users, track the completion status of each of your tax packages, view and edit history, create user groups, and it also provides the ability to attach documents. In addition, while DataFlow utilizes standard Excel workbooks as templates, the data that's entered into the tax packages is saved into a cloud-based database, which can then be retrieved into other DataFlow packages, or it can also be retrieved into outside Excel files. Build custom reports that extract the data you're collecting in your DataFlow packages. DataFlow also has a rollover feature. How many hours does your department currently spend rolling over your tax packages year to year or quarter to quarter? DataFlow can actually do this automatically, and we find this to be one of the bigger time savings found with DataFlow. And lastly, DataFlow is a template-based system. In other words, one Excel file is used as the template for all of your tax packages. Even though each entity's tax package is unique and contains data unique to it, the Excel file that it's utilizing is a single template common to all of your tax packages. This allows you to make a change in just one place and have it apply to all of your tax packages, even after the tax packages have been deployed and are live. So for example, if you make a change to your template, your data providers will see the change the next time they open their tax package. Another great feature of DataFlow is that it has direct integration with General Ledger Manager, which means we're able to pull trial balance data directly into DataFlow packages from General Ledger Manager. DataFlow is also compatible with ONESOURCE Excel add-in and work papers, so we're able to push data directly into other ONESOURCE products such as ONESOURCE Tax Provision and ONESOURCE Income Tax. So here's a simple visual representation of a typical DataFlow solution where DataFlow packages are deployed to data providers and the data they enter into their tax packages is stored here in the DataFlow repository. And typically we'll set these up to push to other ONESOURCE products directly from DataFlow. And I was going to hand this over to Joe to talk a little bit about kind of how they're currently set up. Their DataFlow environment is currently set up, give you an idea of what that looks like.
Thanks, Chuck. So we've been using DataFlow for about 4 or 5 years now. So before explaining the benefits of DataFlow, I'd kind of like to go over what our return process was pre-DataFlow days, kind of detailing the headaches that I'm sure many of you can relate to. So before DataFlow, we really use our local network to maintain and store all of our tax packages and work paper files, our M1 work papers. It was a real pain because these had to be rolled over year after year. There really wasn't any uniformity between the tax packages and the work papers themselves, between each company. And it was always difficult trying to compare information from one company to another and also trying to consolidate data because things not being uniform, you're going to have rows that don't match up and ones that don't match up. So there was just a lot of manual integration that we had to do. And at a certain point, we kind of realized that we needed to get something better, be a little bit more efficient. But in all that, also, we had to email all the tax packages out separately to the finance teams of each individual site, requesting they fill it out, email it back to us by whatever due date we picked. It just became a very annoying task to try and stay on top of each of the sites. We had to remind them to complete each workbook on time. They were missing information or it just needed changes for whatever reason. It was more like babysitting than actual tax prep at a certain point. Not to mention we would just receive different versions of workbooks from the sites, so we never would even know what was the latest and greatest workbook we should be using. And then another big problem that our internal tax return work papers had, that there wasn't really any direct link from the tax packages that the sites were filling out to the actual M1 work papers that we were using to complete OIT, the return in OIT, I mean. We basically had to take all the information that the sites put in the tax packages, copy and paste it into our work papers. And this would include the trial balance, fixed asset information, intangible information, equity, state apportionment, amongst many other things. And then the work papers also had no direct link to OIT itself, not into TAS or into the organizer, meaning we had to basically then manually import the trial balance, the apportionment, enter all tax-free classes, M1 adjustments. That all had to basically be either imported or punched in manually into OIT itself. So as you can imagine, doing this for dozens and dozens of companies became very tedious, and it opened us up to a greater margin of human error. And not having uniformity between the work papers, we would have M1s being on different tabs. Account mappings weren't consistent from company to company, and then trying to put together supporting work papers, such as a consolidated tie-out of, a book to tax income summary, really became, it was almost, I wouldn't say it was impossible, but the amount of time it took where we would have to open up every single work paper from our network, copy the links over, manually link things. It just got to be too chaotic. So at a certain point, we realized we needed to make a change. We kind of needed to get with the times, and this process was just becoming very archaic. We were acquiring too many companies year to year to really keep up with this old process. So once we implemented DataFlow a few years back, it really has done wonders for us, for our department, in terms of task management, completion time, and the automation features that it has. Our tax packages and work papers are accessed off of a cloud-based server. The days really of emailing and the babysitting back and forth, that really has kind of come to an end. Our tax packages and workbooks all work off the same template, like Chuck was saying. So everything really has now become uniform across the board. And as Chuck also mentioned, we have the ability now to roll over everything in DataFlow with basically just checking the boxes of the files that we want to roll over. You hit the rollover button and you're done. It takes a matter of minutes. All the accountants at our site have their own logins to go into DataFlow, so they're able to access their tax package remotely from anywhere, anytime they want. And only one user is able to get into the file at a time. They only give the rights to one user to make active changes in the workbook, but other people are able to go in and view it as needed. And then we're no longer receiving multiple versions of the same file over and over. We always know that we're able to just pull down the file right from the cloud, and we know that that's the latest and greatest, and we can check things in real time. And also, as Chuck mentioned, they're able to attach additional support files right in DataFlow, which has really, really helped us out, and really has almost negated the use of needing to email the sites over and over. They're able to put fixed asset reconciliations in there, SUI wage reports, UNICAP reports, anything that we might need that would be support for our work papers. It lets us assign due dates. We can send out automated emails, reminders. We can track the real-time completion percentage of every file. And then the two biggest draws for DataFlow, the benefits that we've gotten from it, are the data linking and the extractions. So with the data linking, all of the information that gets entered into the tax package by the sites is automatically transferred to our work paper files that are also stored in DataFlow. So when we open up our work papers, the TB is automatically loaded, the M1 balances are automatically loaded, apportionment's automatically loaded, depreciation and amortization are mostly loaded. There's a little bit of work there, but we've gotten it so automated compared to where we used to be. And then after we complete our input in the work papers themselves, we're able to transfer all of the information directly into TAS and the organizer and OIT with the push of a button. The entire process has become almost virtually seamless compared to where we used to be. And then the other great benefit from DataFlow, I was saying, is the extraction, the ability that it gives you. Since all our packages and work papers are now uniformly set up on one template, we're able to extract really any information you want out of there. You can create almost any kind of Excel file, and you can pull any, if there's certain M1s you want to pull information for, certain depreciation detail, there really is no limit as to what you are able to extract out of there and put into a customizable Excel work paper that you can use for yourself. This has really helped us in providing information to our auditors as well in a much more timely fashion. And since a lot of the information is now linking from the cloud, human error has pretty much virtually gone away. There just isn't the mistakes that people might make in there, rolling over work papers or transferring a balance, entering a wrong balance into the work paper, and it may not actually be the TB balance. That's all out the window. I mean, we're in such a better spot than we used to be. Just the automation of the system itself has helped us greatly. The amount of companies we own and number of returns that we have to complete year after year, it just keeps growing and growing. It's never going to decrease. But with DataFlow simplifying and automating much of this compliance process, we pretty much eliminated a lot of the administrative and overhead elements that were a part of our previous process. And we're better able to focus on the important areas of tax preparation and much better able to reach our tax target due dates year after year. That's what I got on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. That's great. I mean, it's great to hear how, all of the benefits you've received from your DataFlow implementation. And one thing I'd like to add to that is, even though we often set these DataFlow processes up to push directly into a ONESOURCE application, we also help out those clients of ours who are maybe outsourcing their compliance to an outside service provider in providing, say, an import file. Export DataFlow data into any form that we want, really. So if we know what the import requirements or layout is of a particular a particular application, we can extract the data in that format and just provide, allow our client to provide an import file. So anyway, that's awesome, Joe. Thank you so much. So Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you to give a sort of a high level overview of Alteryx, and then also just to kind of kick off summarizing the project.
Thanks, Chuck. One of the things Joe and Chuck talked about is, one of the advantages of DataFlow is the direct integration between the DataFlow repository and ONESOURCE Income Tax or other tools. But the question comes is, what if I need to do something else with that data? What if it's not ready to go from DataFlow right into one of those source systems? I need to do additional calculations. I need to do additional data blending. What's an intermediate step I could do? And as we'll discuss later, that's one of the pain points we hit here with the 5472 process. And one of those tools that's widely used nowadays is Alteryx. And I'm imagining most of you are familiar with it, have seen it on some level, maybe a demo of it. So I'll just do a very quick overview for those of you who haven't. Alteryx is what we call an ETL tool. So it's extract, transform, and load. And that's really what it does. It extracts data, large amounts of data directly from source systems or from multiple different files, Excel files. It allows you to combine, blend, enrich, provide calculations of that data, and then it can export it out into other systems or out into Excel. What really makes it powerful, I think, is it sits on your desktop. There's also an enterprise version, but it sits on your desktop. It's very user friendly, and it's just this powerful tool that allows you to really move and transform a lot of data in a very quick fashion. So we're going to show you more specifics of how we use it in this particular functionality, but really just wanted to give you an overview real quick. So with that, Chuck, you want to jump to the next slide, please? So just a couple things on the project itself. As we've discussed, Assa Abloy was an existing DataFlow user, and what we'd all kind of agreed to do is we would come in and take a look at their existing DataFlow templates, their existing processes, and together we kind of work out and say what's working, what's not working. And that's kind of how it goes with any technology implementation, is you always revisit, you always take a look down the road and see where you can make improvements. And one of the errors that really came out was this 5472 data collection. And in a minute or so, Frank will kind of walk you through what some of the current state and future pain points were. All right, Chuck, you want to just jump to the next slide? Thank you. Finally, project details. Just wanted to touch upon really what we were trying to accomplish with this. And as you're going to hear, the existing process was very manual, a lot of data input, a lot of data manipulation. You're spending all your time pushing and pulling data, so really what we wanted to do is we wanted to automate that data movement. So out of DataFlow to the calculations that needed to be done and the final push to OIT. And at the same time, wanted to build in certain checks and balances as well. Just really make sure that there was no errors in the process, that everything that was going in was coming out, and just build in that functionality. So you really had this streamlined process where you were not touching the data from beginning to end, and just automate as much as possible. So that was getting the day. That was our goals. So from here, we're going to have Frank walk you through really what the requirements ask was, what the existing pain points were, and then we'll get into the solution. That Frank, off to you. Frank, you're on mute.
Thanks, Mark. Well, there's our one moment that we were expecting for technology issues, right? Apologies about that. All right, so I thought it would be a good idea to give you a brief intro on the 5472 itself and what's required by the IRS and what types of reportable transactions are needed to be identified and captured on the Form 5472. So Assa Abloy is a foreign-owned U.S. inbound corporation. So the form requires that any U.S. corporation that has a 25% foreign ownership at a minimum is required to file a Form 5472 whenever it has reportable transactions with a foreign affiliate. Okay, so Assa Abloy has approximately 400 foreign companies outside the U.S. group that it has transactional data that needs to be reported on a 5472. So the 5472 failure to file penalties are approximately like $10,000 per 5472 that's not filed properly or missing from your filing. So it's a very high profile for us to ensure that we captured all these transactions and that we properly filled out the dollar values in these reportable transactions, because now in 2019 and 2020 the new BEAT forms and FDII forms that are out there rely upon this 5472 data for population of certain line items to ensure, as a cross check that your U.S. consolidated group is reporting all transactions that the U.S. government wants you to capture on your tax return. So some of those transactions are, interest paid and received, amounts borrowed, essentially any earning strippings that the government would be looking for would be, captured on your BEAT and your FDII forms, and those forms should be tied directly into your 5472 filings. So quite important for us to ensure that we had a solid process and we're capturing the data properly to avoid the penalties. And due to the size of our company and the inbound nature of most of our transactions, we are highly sensitive to the 5472 filings. So that's kind of a brief overview of the 5472. It is a required form, and approximately 150 5472 standalones and one consolidated 5472 filing are done in the Assa Abloy return. So as you can tell, that's quite a few, and each of them could have anywhere from one transaction to potentially 10 or 12 transactions on it. So the volume of data that we were dealing with it was quite cumbersome. So now I want to give you a little kind of overview of what our previous process was and how we handled all that massive amount of information that we had to gather. Since we were just talking about DataFlow, and I'm not sure if everyone's a current user or not, but maybe some of these prior process explanations will make a little more sense now that Joe and Chuck and Mark have kind of given an overview of the processes and how DataFlow works. So prior to the new Alteryx process that was developed with KPMG, Assa Abloy was using the DataFlow templates that we currently had enhanced to be DataFlow enabled and bring the data into our workflow. And the required tax packages were coming in from about 100 different controllers throughout the US group. So as part of our annual information requests that go out, our templates, as Joe was discussing, we would request the transactional information for any cross-border transactions that occurred between a U.S. entity and a foreign affiliate that's in the affiliated Assa Abloy group. The data was populated by the field into our templates and then saved into our DataFlow workflow and OIT. So once all the packages were checked in and received from the field, our tax team would then extract the information from DataFlow into a large Excel workbook with one tab for each operating division in the group. So as mentioned, that's about 110 tabs of different extractions coming out of DataFlow into a large Excel workbook. So that's when the real work would start. Okay, so once the field loaded everything, we would then pull the data out of DataFlow into an Excel workbook and begin manipulating it. So since the information was coming to us at an operational level instead of a legal entity level, the 5472 filings are required to be filed at a legal level. So we would first need to sub-consolidate the data from those 100 plus individual tabs into legal entity format, all right, which was quite a bit of work for us. And then on top of that, we would then need to create a master data sheet once we got to a legal entity level. Entity level data sheet was merely a stacking, a copy paste of all of the individual tabs once they've been subtotaled into a large master sheet. Okay, that master sheet would then have to be manipulated further. So now that we have everyone in the same tab within the book, we would then have to decide which ones would be filed on a consolidated basis and which ones would be filed on a standalone basis. So the 5472 rules require that if you're filing in a U.S. consolidated group, if you have transactions with a U.S. member and another foreign affiliate, that would be a standalone if it was just one transaction between one member and one affiliate. If more than one U.S. member has a transaction with the same foreign affiliate, you would then file that on a consolidated basis. All right, so our consolidated return would then be picking up all the transactions for U.S. entities that had transactions with the same foreign affiliates. So it became okay. We had to develop several different complex pivot tables to look at the data in different ways, one from the U.S. standpoint and one from the foreign affiliate standpoint, to make sure that we were cross-referencing the data properly and that all of the consolidated entities would end up on one consolidated return. So the pivot table functions obviously were helpful. However, they lead to human error, as Joe discussed. There's also, during our review process, we would be changing these individual transactional reporting. If there was an error found during a review, then we'd have to go back and repopulate the master sheet, update the pivot tables to make sure that one that might have been a standalone return before is now in the consolidated, would change our consolidated numbers and change our standalone numbers constantly. So we'd go, start the process with maybe 100 standalone, 5472s required, but then by the time we finish the return, we might have 130 standalone returns, and some of the information in the actual consolidated return would be a lot lower amount than what we started with. So once we completed the process of review and the manipulation of the data, then we still had to get the data into OIT. And that was a manual process, right? So we had to go in and enter the data for each field. Each year there'd be probably 5 to 20 new 5472s, which hadn't been loaded into the system in previous years. The carryover data for old 5472s that were in OIT would be incorrect because we might have had a transaction last year, but we don't have a transaction this year. So there was a lot of review and file changes and manipulation of data that was required that brought us to the point where we said, we really need to get a better process. And working with the KPMG team on this, has really accelerated our processes. We've been very happy with the results that we've received on the 5472 side. I think it was a complete success. We no longer need these complex pivot tables that were, fraught with potential errors. And since the data is now also being pushed into OIT as opposed to us manually typing in the data into the individual 5472s, we're saving about 160 to 200 man hours a year in this process alone. And when you think about, what do you get out of the 5472? You get nothing. It's a zero value add form within the return, but it costs you $10,000 if you make a mistake. So none of the data is counting towards your taxable income, but it is required. So we needed to figure out a way to make it better, and I believe we have made it better, and we continue to adjust on those processes to enhance them even more. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chuck.
Okay, thank you, Frank. That's awesome information. Okay, so with that brings us to another unofficial polling question. And again, just type your answers into the chat if you'd like. But the second question is, do you currently use a third-party tool to collect and manage tax data in your department? Okay, and while those answers are coming in, we can continue with the solution. All right, so we wanted to get more in depth on the solution that we implemented for Assa Abloy to solve this 5472 problem. And so bringing back this visual representation, you'll see it's just a little bit different than the first one I showed you. Again, we deployed data collection packages to users, collected that data, and data being saved into the DataFlow repository. So one point I want to make is that this was a solution that was already, they already had a DataFlow solution in place. They had another firm implement DataFlow for them. However, they came to us saying, DataFlow has been great. However, we still are experiencing this particular pain problem. Can you take a look at our templates? Can you help us come up with a solution for this problem we're having? And that's the 5472 problem. So in this case, what we're doing is, instead of taking the data and going directly to a ONESOURCE application, now we're extracting this 5472 data into an outside Excel file, into a report that we're then able to include in this Alteryx workflow. And I'm going to hand it over to Mark to talk more about that piece.
Thanks, Chuck. So right here, this particular slide is an architectural slide of the process solution, and there's a lot going on here. So we're gonna walk through a few key points here. But to go back to that extraction file, so what Chuck built is all that data from all those different packages that they've collected the 5472 data. That's now all in one file in one tab, which is great. We have it in one location. It's in a structured format, but it's also a pretty huge file. About 80,000 rows long, and it's got about 30 columns of data. So there's still quite a process you have to go through to then get that from this one massive table into something that's importable into OIT. And so what we first came up with was this overall design architecture. This is something we do in all our engagements, and really what it does is lets everybody understand what the steps in the process is going to be. Because as much as it's a technology solution, it's also a process solution, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable with all the steps that you're going to have to do. So you see we've kind of broken it up into the 4 high-level components. So there's data collection, data management, data transformation and calculations, reporting and analytics. So kind of broad categories, and there's certainly some overlap in what we do. But overall, this is the end-to-end solution. So on the first side here, on the data collection, you have DataFlow where you're collecting all the intercompany transactions. You have that extraction file that we had just talked about. And then you also have a master data file, and we're going to go over that in a little more detail. But a master data file is a separate source file that really houses a lot of your administrative data, a lot of your rules and logic, and it's one of the inputs into your ultimate solution. So those are kind of your input files. Then that's when Alteryx comes in. Alteryx is going to gather that data. It's going to do the transformation. It's going to do some of those processes that Frank described that they had to do through pivot tables and some manual analysis. Alteryx is going to take care of all those calculations. And then it's going to produce a series of outputs. And one of those outputs is going to be a template that can then be uploaded right into OIT. So using Excel add-in, it's going to automate the creation of that. It's also going to do a lot of diagnostics and error checks, and this is absolutely critical whenever you're automating a process. So we'll go in a little more detail about that, but it's going to produce all those diagnostics. It's going to produce error checks. It's also going to produce a consolidation file. And then finally, it's going to push, through Excel add-in, we'll push all those into ONESOURCE Income Tax. And one thing you can see, and we won't flip back, but the original current state slide, every one of those steps was a somewhat manual process. You had to go through and you had to do a lot of intervention, whether it was running the pivots or visually annualizing it or categorizing things. In here, you can see it's very automated. There's, of course, still a few manual components. Someone's got to put in all the intercompany transactions. Somebody has to update the master data. But after that point, you're now really in review mode. So now you're opening files and you're pushing it to the source systems, but you're not keying in data. You're now looking at that data and making sure that it looks right, that it makes sense, that you're not missing something. So you've gone from that really kind of data pusher to data reviewer, which is really the role you should be playing. So it not only saves you a lot of hours, the hours that you are spending are much more value add. So this is kind of the overall architecture. And so what we're going to do in the next couple of slides here is we're going to go through what is master data, why do we use it, why do we set it up in this way, and how do we structure that. We'll go a little bit into the Alteryx workflow, just very high level, give them some screenshots of what the workflow looks like. We'll take a look at the upload template so you can see kind of the outputs there. And then we'll look at and talk a little bit about the checks and controls reporting that we did on top of that. So Chuck, if you want to flip to the next slide. Okay, so master data, what is master data? If we think about any solution or any process that we're going through, and if we think of the world that we live in with just Excel files, if we have a series of Excel files or one massive Excel file with 50, 100, 200 tabs in it, there's two really big problems. One is, where is your source of truth? Where is your one point of data that you can rely on? And oftentimes you don't have it. It's in multiple systems. It's in multiple places within the Excel file. It's just kind of scattered throughout. The second thing is it really scalable and adaptable to future changes? You acquire a new company, you merge a new companies, you have new transactions. With these big files, what do you end up doing? You have to add another tab, add another row. Oh, did I make sure I updated everything? It's a real challenge to keep these things updated. And when we apply this to a 5472, it's even more critical because the only thing for sure, for the most part, especially for a company like Assa Abloy, you are not going to have the same 5472 transactions this year that you had last year. There's going to be new companies. There's going to be companies without transactions. It's going to change. So if you build a solution that is available for today, it's not going to work for you next year. So you need to have something that's very scalable, and that's really what master data comes into. So what master data is in this case, it's a big Excel file. And it's controlled Excel. So, data inputs are very, managed. You can only input data in certain places, or it's a drop down. So it's a very structured Excel file. But what this is where you house a lot of your administrative data and information and also your rules. So we're going to have a list of all entities. We're going to have a list of OIT binders, company codes, whatever your source system codes are, and those could vary by different systems that you have. Your ERP system might be different than your compliance system, might be different than your provision system. So we're going to house all that here. We're going to put the rules of how entities roll up. So if we have to have divisions into legal entities, whatever roll-ups we need to do, we're gonna have this all in this one location. We're also going to have a lot of information about those entities. So just to give you an example, like so for 5472s, if you have 150 of them and 120 of them are the same as last year, and you got to go and manually put in data, what are you going to do? You're going to open up that 5472, you're going to type in the data, and then you're done. What if something changed, or there's a new address, or new information, or a new data requirement? You may either just not look at it because you got to go into every single one of them, or it may just be missed, or then you have to go into each one individually. So within the master data, we also house all the addresses, business activity codes, every piece of information you need for the 5472 is in this one single location. So you could just go in there and update it. We also put in things like mapping to binders. And then we also do the last bullet point on here is template design. And this is really going from the output into OIT. As the form 5472 changes, we don't have to change our whole process. We just have to change master data. So this is where all this is housed. So if Assa Abloy acquires a new entity, all they have to do is go into master data. If they have one entity, if they reorganized and one subsidiary is under one entity and then it moves to a different entity, we just have to go into master data. And once you update it here, it just flows through the rest of the process. It becomes part of the automation process. So it's pretty seamless from here. So if we go back to the couple of pain points we talked about, single source of truth. Now you have your single source of truth. It's just in your master data. You know exactly where you go. You know exactly where the information is. You just go here. And then the second part is scalability and adaptability to future changes. Again, you're not hunting through tabs. You're not even digging in the Alteryx workflow. And I'll show you a little reasons for that pretty soon. You don't have to go to a bunch of different spots or try to hunt and peck. Anybody can pick this up and figure out right where they need to add it. So that's master data, very key source file as part of our future state architecture. So Chuck, you want to jump over to Alteryx now? So this is kind of the, I guess it's the third step. So if the first step is the collection of data in DataFlow in the extraction file, second step is updating your master data file. Third step is your Alteryx workflow, and this is really the engine of the transaction. This is where a lot of the work is done. So those steps Frank talked about. We're going to do what Alteryx is going to do is it's going to look at that extraction file, that 80,000 rows of data, that with 30 columns. It's going to look at that. It's going to compare it to the master data, and it's going to apply the rules. It's going to say if these two if this company and this company roll up into one legal entity, it's going to consolidate all that data for you. It's going to do that analysis of saying, do I have a one-to-one transaction between a U.S. company and a foreign sister company? Or do I have 2-to-1? Do I have more than one U.S. company? It's also going to apply other rules like, am I filing a 5471 for that foreign entity? If so, I don't need a 5472. I can pull out those transactions. All those rules that are in master data, it's going to apply to that one big massive extraction file. So it's going to go through a series of steps to do that. So it's going to do the divisions to legal entity roll up. It's going to do that consolidated versus standalone filing. And then the final thing it's going to do is actually create all the upload templates. And we're going to cover that a little bit later. And then the final piece is the analysis and error checks. And we'll talk about that as well. But this is, again, validating that all the data is correct, summary files that make it a little bit more easy to review. And then any kind of OIT, I have put OIT requirements here, but it's any kind of requirements you may have. Are there character limitations? Are there certain formatting things we have to avoid? We build all that into Alteryx as part of a data cleansing and just make sure the data is, at the end of the day, that it's in the right format and the right way for the whole process to work. So Chuck, if you want to flip over. So this, we won't spend a lot of time here. It's deliberately small, so you can't read it because it's not the point of it. I get that it's tiny. This is actually just one piece of the Alteryx workflow that we built, but there's a few things I wanted to highlight here. You can see how it's very structured. So everything's boxed off, and each one of those boxes is performing a separate task. So it could be data cleansing, it could be the sub-consolidations, it could be the separate versus consolidated filings, it could be the report generation, but each one of these is going to be a separate process within your entire workflow. Everything's labeled. It's telling you what all these different tools are doing, and if we go back to what we talked about with Alteryx, each one of these little icons, tools, they're performing a separate function. And when it's a critical step or it's an important step, you label it. You say, what is this doing and why is it doing it? So someone could jump in here and take a quick look at it. But just as critical, if you don't want to look at that, what we also did is built an app on top. So what that app does is you don't even ever have to go into Alteryx. You can just open up the app, point to the extraction file and the master data file, run the workflow, and it'll produce all your output reports. You don't even have to go in here. So it just makes it a little bit easier to run. And then the kind of final piece of this is, like I said, this is only part of it. There's a lot going on here, right? There's a lot of steps that are here, and there's a lot of different pieces to it. So what I don't want to do is I don't want you to have to go in here and make changes if something's changes within your company. You know, there might be times you have to change it, but you don't want to be going in here if you have to add a new entity or change some logic. And that's why we have the master data. So you don't have to dig through all these things to try to find a solution. You could just kind of go to that one Excel file. So that's kind of a high level of what Alteryx looks like. So this is very much the engine. This is what's producing all the outputs. And one of the critical outputs would be the next one that we're going to show here. And so this is the ONESOURCE Income Tax upload template. And for those of you who are familiar with OIT, there's multiple ways to get data into it. There's work papers, there's Excel add-in, there's uploads, there's direct connections. There's a lot of different ways to get into it. There's now APIs between Alteryx and ONESOURCE Income Tax. So there's multiple ways to do it. At the time when we built this, and it's still a great solution, is what we elected to do was use an upload template with Excel add-in. And the way we have this working is what Alteryx is going to do is after it goes through all those calculations and reporting to get you to what 5470 transaction do I need to report by entity, it's going to create a template for every binder upload that you have to do. So it'll be for every US entity, it'll be a list of every 5472 they have to report with every single data point that they need. And again, one template per entity. So what we have an existing Excel blank template sitting out there, and Alteryx, based on the calculations, will take each one of those templates and save it in a designated file. Then you just go into that file, open it up, and import it into Excel. And Chuck, if you just flip to the next slide, we can kind of see what that looks like. So again, very small. I apologize. Just wanted to give you a flavor for this. So you'll see, like, it might be really challenging to see, but there's a couple of tabs on this file, and one is a tab with the Alteryx output, and it looks very similar to this, but that's where Alteryx is going to dump all the data. And then we pull it all into here, and what this has is at the top, this has your year, your company number, what the binder group is, what the binder name is, telling it all the information it needs of where it's going to push this data in OIT. And then you'll see related party names, a long list going down. That is all the 5472s. And if we had this file live and you went across, it would include data for every single applicable 5472 data input that you need. So this is going to push all that data into it. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create a new one. So once you push this in, you're then very much into review phase now, and you just have to go into OIT and take a look. I think that's it here, Chuck. Maybe the last couple of slides here. So finally is what we've talked about with data validation. Again, very critical. You saw that Alteryx workflow where you're going through a lot of data. We want to make sure that we're not losing any data, that everything checks out. So we do things like number of records in equals number of records out, dollar values in equals dollar value out, year over year analysis. Just when you have this much, this many steps in the process, you want to make sure they have everything covered. And I think the final slide, Chuck, we have an example of this here. So this is an example of the data checks output. And there's, we're going through record counts. We're making sure that all the records, so that all that population of data from that extraction file, it all is coming through. We check dollar amounts. Just a very high level reconciliation, everything. And we have multiple checks that we do, just again, make sure that all the data is working. And whenever you're building an Alteryx workflow, this is really critical to the process. Okay, thanks, Chuck. I think that's it.
No, thank you, Mark. Great information, thanks. Okay, so that brings us to another unofficial polling question. True or false, your tax department could benefit from better data collection and data management processes. And we are actually approaching time here. So while you're doing that, I'm going to skip over here to the results. And Frank, I believe you were going to tell us quickly about the results that you've experienced from this solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you can tell, the process was very time consuming, right? We had many man hours into this. The ability to confirm with any sense of correctness whether we were capturing everything was also in debate. But at this point, now we feel like the data is getting into the system quickly, efficiently. There's validation checks that are occurring at many different steps in the process. So our end state now is, we receive the data in the file format that Mark just showed, and we load that into the system with one push. Just the mere entry of the data into the system, which was probably the easiest step in our former process, takes 40 to 60 hours of man time to be able to get that data into the system. So end state is that we have a process that's working well. We are extremely that there's no manual work involved anymore in the process. So we could honestly say that this is a 100% success on our side. And I feel that the process that's in place right now, maybe we can make some tweaks as we go along, but it's very viable. It works, and it's saving us a ton of time in our tax preparation process.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Frank. And that brings us to the end of our session. I wanted to thank Mark, Joe, and Frank for their participation, and thank you for attending. Please be sure to complete a session evaluation, and thanks. Enjoy the rest of this year's Synergy Conference.